Roucostache. Je fais une très très brève présentation en français de qui vous êtes, et puis vous avez l'occasion de la redire en anglais éventuellement. Donc vous êtes de Roucostache, professeur associé en études patristiques à la Sydney College of Divinity, donc l'université de Sydney, dans le département études de religion. Vous allez nous parler, je vous laisse présenter le thème de votre intervention. Je crois que vous avez environ une dizaine de minutes, avec aussi après la possibilité d'un temps d'échange et de questions. Je vous laisse la parole.
Thank you, Alexandra. Bonjour à tous. Try my French. It's good to be here, and as Alexander already mentioned, I'm an associate professor in patristic studies at the Sydney College of Divinity in Australia, and also an honorary associate of Department of Studies in Religion at the University of Sydney. My interest in John Chrysostom is inconsistent. From time to time I do Chrysostom, but not all the time. But nevertheless, in the last few years, I managed to do a few things. For one, I have edited or co-edited this book, John Chrysostom, Past, Present and Future, where alongside people like me who land in the field of Chrysostomian studies from time to time, there are a few major names of the field, like Pauline Allen and Wendy Meyer. Continuing my boasting when was it, 2017, in the Journal of Theological Studies, it's an Oxford journal, I published a very brief article revisiting the date of Chrysostom's Homilies on Genesis. My presentation today is actually based largely on this book I published last year at Brill, Humankind and the Cosmos, Early Christian Representations, where chapter 7 covers a lot of the material that, I won't be able to address with you today, but anyway, it's mainly there. And if you'll allow me, I'll begin sharing my screen. I have a few slides. Jean Chrysostome lisait-il Philon, une analogie philonienne dans les homilies sur la Genèse. Did John Chrysostom read Philo, a Philonian analogy in Homilies on Genesis? You have the abstract there, the summary of my presentation. No point in going back to it. I'll begin by pointing out that an esteemed Australian scholar, David Runia, points out in his book Philo in Early Christian Literature, a survey published in 1993, the following, and you see the text there, what David says. Leading Christian writers associated with or influenced by the Antiochenes school reveal little acquaintance with Philo. One will look in vain for a reference to Philo in the vast body of works written by or associated with John Chrysostom, the bosom friend of Theodore of Mopsuestia, and in the writings of the prolific Theodoret of Cyrus, who represents the next generation of Antiochene exegesis. Philo is mentioned only once. So what David Runia says is the Antiochenes were not interested in Philo, perhaps because already in certain milieus, Philo was associated with some kind of honorary Christian of Alexandria. Legends also included him in the heads of the so-called theological school of Alexandria, and therefore the Antiochenes, who did not love Alexandria much, especially the allegorical interpreters of scripture, sort of left Philo out. What I try to say today is that regardless of how much Antiochian writers would reject or at least ignore the legacy of Philo, in some places we find not references, but at least allusions to some kind of, of Philonian echoes, if you like. And what I'll try to say today is that a great Antiochian, John Chrysostom, actually can be listed here as one who wasn't completely closed in relation to Philo's legacy. So I go with David Runia. I believe that yes, largely the Antiochians did not like Philo, but some exceptions might be found. My approach, based on the book that I have already mentioned, goes as follows. First of all, I'll introduce Philo's image of the king, the palace, and the kingdom. Then just briefly a couple of patristic antecedents in Athanasius of Alexandria and Gregory of Nyssa, and then I'll look at the passage in John Chrysostom where I believe we can identify some Philonian echoes. Now, to Philo. Philo, in his book on the creation of the world according to Moses, in passages or paragraphs 77 to 88, mentions a problem, a topic. Why would humankind be created last? According to the book of Genesis, God created everything from the heavens and the earth to animals and so on and so forth, and humankind at the back. Perhaps I'm certain that you know the fact that according to the classical mentality, what comes first is noble, worthwhile. So antiquity means nobility, and what comes last is of little account, is of no account. And therefore, this was a paradox. On the one hand, all these people, including Philo, shared in the great legacy of antiquity, believing in the nobility of ancient things. On the other hand, the scriptures shocked everyone by placing the human being, the noblest of beings, of the creation, of course, at the end of the work of creation. And in paragraph 84, in his On the Creation of the World, Philo says, the Father, God, when he brought him, the human being, into existence as the living being who was by nature dominant, not only in fact, but also by means of a pronouncement, appointed him king of all the creatures in the sublunary realm, so the Aristotelian division of reality, those on land and in the sea and born on the air. All the mortal creatures in the three elements, earth, water, and air, he subjected to humankind's rule. And Philo continues by showing that angelic beings were not subjected to humanity. That's what he says. But what matters is that this side of the moon's orbit, in the sublunary realm, everything is ruled over by humanity. And what Philo wants to say here, I couldn't squeeze in the entire text, is that regardless of this chronological strangeness of humankind coming in the picture of creation last, in reality, the human being is appointed and humankind is appointed to rule over this sublunary domain, sublunary realm. So that's pretty much the idea of a world as a kingdom or a palace, and the human being as a king. Now, there are patristic antecedents, as I mentioned already. This image appears, and it doesn't surprise me because the Alexandrians always cherished Philo's wisdom. There is a reference in Athanasius Against the Gentiles, chapter 38, and there's an analogy there with the city and the king. If you see disorder in the city, this means the king isn't at home, and so on and so forth. So perhaps this is more of an allusion to Philo, not necessarily a paraphrase or a quotation. More interesting is Gregory of Nyssa. Gregory, who was a student, so to speak, of the Alexandrians, who in his book on the making of the human being, chapter 2, gives an account. It's like a summary of all those chapters in Philo's on the making of the world, or the creation of the world. And he says as follows, this is my translation: "This great and precious thing, the human person, had not taken yet its place in the world of beings. It is not appropriate for the ruler to be revealed before that which had to be ruled over. However, as the creator of the universe prepared beforehand a royal palace of sorts for the one who would be king in the future, now it was appropriate for the ruler to be revealed." And so on and so forth. He continues showing that the human being, although being created last, is in reality like the king whose palace or kingdom is prepared by the creator. And finally, to John Chrysostom, in his Homilies on Genesis, well, the 8th homily, paragraph 71, he returns to this image as follows. Again, my translation. Where you see references to my book, Humankind and the Cosmos, it's not just the text, it's also my analysis there. So John says, "Think of a king who is about to enter a city, guards bearing spears, and all the other courtiers precede him, as it should, to prepare the royal palace for his arrival," and so on and so forth. So the same image, John, however, uses also the image of a kingly or royal procession, but the story is the same. The human being created last by God is not of little account. It's like a king for whom the entire creation was prepared. Well, what's the lesson? What's the learning? These are my this is my understanding so far, and therefore I leave it as an open conclusion. So on the one hand, John Chrysostom uses the Philonian analogy of the king and the kingdom, but he renders it in his own terms with the procession, the royal procession. Therefore, there's no textual connection between what he presents and Philo. However, like Philo, he does in other words, uses the analogy in order to explain humankind's late arrival, and that this doesn't mean inferiority to the preceding creations. Now, my question, did John borrow the image from Philo directly or via Athanasius and especially Gregory of Nyssa? It is difficult to ascertain anything in this case, because as David Runia pointed out, there are no references to Philo in John. Perhaps there may be some allusions as this one, but it seems unlikely that he actually read Philo. My suggestion at this stage would be that he actually derived the analogy not from Philo, but from Gregory of Nyssa, who was an avid reader of Philo. Regardless of the answer, so whether or not John read Philo, it seems that the gap between Alexandria and Antioch gets smaller and smaller, since we have in this case a Philonian analogy reaching into the end of the 4th century, an Antiochean writer. And this is where I leave it.
Thank you so much, Doru. Oh, pas de micro. Ah si, ça marche. Thank you so much. If someone got some questions... Non, mais l'autre marche, je pense.
La salle...
C'est le celui de la salle. If you... Some question of, I don't know, comprehension or
Mhm. Thank you very much for this new lead to investigate Chrysostom sources, literary sources, a field that unfortunately was left behind for many decades, and we should try to identify more of these sources in the near future in our research, because obviously John Chrysostom is not a meteorite in the sky, and well, that's very challenging. Thank you.
Yep, and thank you for your comment. Yes, it's. I think it's very important to be mindful of the fact that these people whom all the scholarship located in this school or that school, these people actually were very versatile, and they relied on numerous sources, many times unacknowledged, as in this case. As I said, it's quite difficult to make a textual connection between Chrysostom and Philo, because Chrysostom seems to have narrated this in his own words, so it's not like a paraphrase or something like in Gregory of Nyssa. But the fact that he wasn't reluctant to embrace this less Antiochean image shows that, yes, indeed, there could be other hints in his writings that he wasn't so against Alexandria, including Philo.
Another question from Catherine, and after that, Paul Claude. I got a question too.
Just to thank you first for your communication. Yes, I'm convinced that the links between Chrysostom and Alexandria and Alexandrian exegesis are very important. Maybe you know and remember the communication of Alain de Bouillec and Gilbert Homilies in Oxford in 1991, where they showed especially big influence of Origen on Chrysostom exegesis. And very often when Chrysostom says, some people say, between these some people, it's Origen. But the problem is that he doesn't quote more the Cappadocian fathers, or anyway, he doesn't quote them by the name or saying the names. So it would be very interesting to compare, and I'm not sure that there will be more quotation or influence of the Cappadocian fathers than from Alexandrian exegesis in the US. I really think that the links with Alexandria are very strong, and of course the communication is gives one stone more to the belief of this recommendation. Thank you very much.
And thank you. This is an excellent comment. Thank you very much. Yes, it's obvious that. Yes, I can see you now.
I wanted to see you, but you are in my back.
Yeah, all good. Indeed, there are many traces of origin in John Chrysostom, but we shouldn't be worried by the fact that he did not quote anybody. That was the practice of the time. At least in the patristic tradition, we hardly find any references, especially in polemical contexts. Yes, they would like to bring about the names of some big theologians whose word is authoritative and so on and so forth. But I don't think exegesis was always or any time such a tremendous topic of controversy, and they didn't feel like quoting. After all, they all believed that despite differences, they belonged to the same Christian tradition, and therefore they could rely on one another, borrow from one another, without having any idea that, well, this is plagiarism or something. So this makes our task very difficult. You know, when these people don't quote anything, they don't quote any sources. But this is where the beauty of our task comes to the fore, because, well, yes, we need to show diligence in comparing text and so on and so forth. It's tedious, but it's very rewarding when we find some, signs, little signs of, wow, there's a connection there.
Thank you for the answer. Maybe Paul Claude, you got a question, I think.
Merci. Alors, je vais parler français. Je ne sais pas si c'est permis, because I prefer to ask my question in French.
Yeah. Go on. I can understand. I can understand. Yeah, I can understand, but I don't have the exercise of conversation. So.
Thank you.
No worries.
Alors, donc, comme je le disais tout à l'heure, je m'intéresse aux relations entre l'univers et Chrysostome, entre l'univers et l'humain chez Chrysostome. Et mon propos se veut simplement de vous remercier parce que je suis en train de rédiger justement un chapitre relatif à l'image, à l'interprétation de l'image chez les pères de l'Église, ceux qui ont précédé Chrysostome. Et j'ai eu à rencontrer justement cette interprétation chez Philon et chez Grégoire de Nyssa, parce que Athanasius, j'ai choisi de ne pas en parler. Alors, c'est un livre, votre livre, que je l'ignorais son existence, mais je pense que ça va beaucoup m'aider pour la suite de mes recherches. Thank you, merci beaucoup.
Yeah,
voilà, c'était ce que je voulais dire.
And thank you, Claude. It's important to know that there are kindred spirits out there. Because patristic cosmology is not one of those well-rewarded niches of scholarship. So it's good to know that there's still people who try to look at the world, at the universe through the eyes of the church fathers and mothers. So it's good to know. Thank you for the comment.
Thank you so much. There is any question more, or maybe a last one from my part for you, Professor. You seem to be interested by this connection, especially between Chrysostom and Gregory of Nyssa. And do you have some only links that you did based on the texts, or there is some matter of, books, of article who studied before this, or tried to study this link between the both? Do you know if there is something?
Well, yeah, look, honestly, I am not aware of any attempts, at least in recent scholarship, to bring together John Chrysostom and Gregory of Nyssa. Actually, it was a fluke. It was by chance that I stumbled on this analogy in both works. But this is because of my interest in patristic cosmology. So I read many things that have to do with worldview, representing the cosmos in the patristic tradition. And this is how I could identify these passages. So it was really by chance that I have identified. But otherwise, Chrysostom was a reader of the Cappadocians, as Kathleen already pointed out. For example, also in this book, I mention a clear textual connection between John Chrysostom's interpretation of the Spirit hovering the waters of creation in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. So there's the beginning, the chaos, whatever, there's waters there, and there's the Spirit of God. And he uses the same phrase that was used generation before him by Basil of Caesarea, so Gregory of Nyssa's brother. So they have the same expression. If I remember correctly, zotikin tinadin, I mean a power, a life-giving power. So the Holy Spirit bestows upon the creation a life-giving power. And the same phrase appears in Basil the Great. The same phrase is reiterated by John Chrysostom. So, was he a reader of the Cappadocians? I can say yes. These three examples, I believe, are a sufficient proof. But there must be much more out there. And as I said, it takes a lot of time and effort to compare texts that otherwise don't refer to one another. Because, as we discussed already, John doesn't quote his sources.
Yeah. Because as I'm studying the notion of proairesis in Chrysostom, and I was quite impressed by the link between the Cappadocians, especially Basil and Gregory of Nyssa, and the thought of Chrysostom about this word, especially in the conclusion of this word.
Oh yeah, and it makes perfect sense because all of them tried to defend human freedom, especially against Manichaeism and the idea of, if you like, astrological determinism. For them, the topic of evil could not be treated otherwise but by referring to the human capacity for free choice. So, yeah.
This topic is very common between them.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
And thank you everyone.
You're able to understand the French. We will come back to the French.
I enjoy listening to your beautiful language. I read a lot. I used to speak much better French, but in the last 10 to 15 years I haven't used it almost at all. So that's it.
You have to come back more often.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
All the best.
Après